Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We are delighted to welcome you to the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are really, really excited to be celebrating the movement Made Us, A Father, a Son, and the Legacy of a Freedom Ride by David Dennis Sr. and David Dennis Jr. We are joined tonight by both of the authors and by Josie Duffy Rice, who is going to be our moderator this evening. So first I'll bring out Josie Duffy Rice. She is a journalist, writer, law school graduate, and podcast host who lives here in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Josie. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed guests. David J. Dennis Sr. is a civil rights veteran and one of the original freedom riders who rode from Montgomery to Jackson in 1961. He served as field secretary for the Congress of Racial Equality in Louisiana and Mississippi from 1961 to 1965, and is co-director with Bob Moses of the Voter Education Committee of the Council of Federated Organizations. He helped organize the Mississippi Freedom Summer, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and the challenge to the National Democratic Party in 1964. He attended Dillard University and earned his law degree at the University of Michigan. In 1972, he co-directed the challenge to the Louisiana Democratic structure that resulted in an African-American chairman and a majority African-American delegation being sent to the National Convention, the first time since Reconstruction. He is the executive director of the Southern Initiative Algebra Project, a nonprofit organization that works to ensure a quality education for all children, especially children of color and the chronically underserved. Please welcome David J. Dennis Sr. And finally, we are joined by his co-author and son, David J. Dennis Jr. He is a senior writer at The Undefeated. His work has been featured in Atlanta Magazine, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, The Huffington Post, among other publications. Dennis is the recipient of the 2021 American Mosaic Journalism Prize. He is a National Association of Black Journalists Salute to Excellence Award winner and was named one of the Root's 100 Most Influential African Americans of 2020. He lives in Georgia with his wife and 2 children and is a graduate of Davidson College. So welcome, David Dennis Jr. Finally, I would just like to thank everyone watching at home on Facebook and to all of you here in the audience. Books will be for sale after the event, and our co-authors will be signing, so please be sure to hang out, meet and greet, and take one home for a friend as well, especially if there's anybody who wanted to be here tonight but who couldn't. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for your work. We're very honored to be here with you.
I am so excited to be here. When David asked me to moderate this event, I did not tell him this, but I had been hoping he was going to ask me to moderate this event ever since I read this book this winter. I just think this is a truly, truly incredible book. I had high standards, and they've been exceeded, so I'm really happy to be sitting here with you all, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Honored to have you. Like, you're a superstar. So.
Oh, please, thank you. That's ridiculous. That's the most ridiculous thing you've said. But I wanted to start by asking why now? Why have you, especially, I'm going to call you David and you Mr. Dennis so we can keep it in together. I wanted to know why you decided to kind of embark on this project now. It's a big project, right? You're like, it changes your relationship with your dad. It's a whole book. You know, any time this could have been a project you chose to do, but why did you choose to do it now?
So I had a plan. I thought books were easy. And so I was like, I'm going to do like 2 like books of essays, like pop culture stuff, like stuff that's more in my wheelhouse. And then like maybe the 3rd book I'll like do this thing without dad and all this stuff. But that's not how it works. I mean, one, dad's 81, so it's important to get this history. It's important to get it. Why so many people that we've wrote about, even the process of writing this book, are no longer, here. I'm glad Dad's here. Glad you're here. But it was, so that added some urgency to it. It's like we need to get these stories down. And then it was also just looking at the state of the world. Like this book was, first of all, let me go back. I'd always wanted to write this book since I was a child. But it felt urgent in a different way in the Trump presidency, in the Ferguson world, and even more so as I was writing it with George Floyd and all that stuff. So it became urgent to write these stories, but also to tell provide a lighthouse for folks who are out in the streets now, who are trying to figure things out now of what happened before, not in the this is what they did, you need to follow them, but just like this is what happened and this is what's possible, in this country.
I'd like to hear from both of you about the process of writing this book, talking to each other about this book, getting the history down. For people who haven't read it yet, the book is mostly from Mr. Dennis's point of view, but also goes into David's point of view, and is so beautifully executed. But the whole time I was reading it, well, first of all, I was like, writing in my parents' voices sounds very stressful, so I'd like to hear about that. But also just, there are a lot of steps to getting this on paper, right? There's a lot of sit-downs between the two of you, I'm sure. There's a lot of memories. There's a lot of emotion. So I'd like to hear from both of you from your own perspectives. What was that experience like?
So first it was just, I went into it in a sort of weird way. Like I went into it just asking questions based on the stories I'd heard, not based on having done a ton of pre-research. It's like, these are the stories that I heard sitting around the table, sitting around you and your friends, like, what about this story? Mostly because I wanted to sort of be put into the perspective of folks who were on the ground, right? Who may not know the larger, American governmental, apparatus, and so people who are on the ground. And so I just started asking Dad questions. Like we had a recording session, and then once the book sort of started to take shape, or it looked like we were doing this, we had a 1 week, just like, let's get everything on paper, so at least I know some sort of story. So if something happens, we have the stories down. And then I would, try to fill in the blanks. There were obviously a lot of blanks due to just memory or the trauma that hides memory or just time or whatever. And so I would go back and fill in blanks with research and try to, do the information and jog his memory. And sometimes I would just write sort of like what sounded like it could have happened. And sometimes seeing something wrong would help him jog and tell me what was right. And we had a plan to do a lot of travel. We went to Shreveport briefly, went to New Orleans for a little bit, in Jackson. We were going to just go to all these places and relive these moments. And the last trip we took was Jackson in about, February 28th, 2020. So
what happened after that?
Yeah, it's like things got a little weird, and so we had to Zoom. It was just Zoom. Mm-hmm. So I would write chapters, and Dad would read them and re-remember, and we'd move stuff around, and I'd go back and try to fact check, and we would just come to this sort of place where it sounded, mostly where it was. I interviewed his friends and peers and things like that to fill in blanks on stories. And so, the memories would come. I had to tell Dad in December, please stop remembering things. If you remember something new or different, just don't tell me. So just that's just what happened. What you remember at the end of December 2021 is just what happened forever. So, and that was that. And it wasn't always easy. Obviously, there were a lot of painful things we had to do that Dad can speak to. and jogging those memories and things like that. But that was a lot of the process.
Yeah, I think that. Okay, is that better? Okay. Yeah, David's been very nice about this. This trip was a pretty tough journey, especially for me, and it was a tough journey for him also. Because what happened is that from around 1965, I began another type of mental process in my head. So a lot of these things didn't want to remember, I guess. I pushed them back. And so I didn't do interviews. I did a few, Eyes on the Prize and some things like that and a couple. But I just sort of vanished. Sort of went into underground, you might call this, is that not doing much out there is. And so what happened is he had to go through the painful piece of trying to get me to remember and to talk about it. Number one is because I knew that if I'm talking about it to anybody, it was going to be him. And the reason why is that he's my son, but I trusted him. Because what other people didn't know is how painful this whole thing was. I mean, for instance, he's asking me to relive the night Meg Evans died. So I'm with my best friend, one of my best friends is, and he and I are talking, we coming from a meeting, and he said, hey man, why don't you come with me? Because Kennedy was making his talk on TV about the Civil Rights Bill, which came out in 1964, but he's going to have the discussion about it. And I say, oh man, somebody can get killed riding the car with you. I ain't going nowhere with you, you know. So I got in the car with Dory Latin and others, and my then wife, Maddie, and us, and we went home. And less than an hour later, you know, I get a call, he's dead. You know, so I have to relive Cheney Goodman Swerner, you know. 24 hours before they died, I'm with them, and they trying to get me to go and trying to stop me from getting in the car with them because I'm supposed to go with them. So finally, I let them win. I don't go, you know. And so 24 hours later, they're dead. So now, you know, I'm just naming those because you will know those, you know, but there are many more than that is. And so you reliving this. And a lot of things that bury so deeply is David would say, Dad, tell me a little bit about this. And I'm like, what are you talking about, boy? You know? I don't know, what are you talking about? I never did that. Said, yes, you did, Dad. We got this. I found this here. This blah, blah, blah. I'm like, huh? You know? And all of a sudden, I got to regurgitate this stuff. Got to come out. And that was not easy. Neither for me, neither him, because it carries over into things that's in the book is you find out he writes me, you know, 3 or 4 letters, you know, that what it's all after impact has on his life. So we talk about the movement. We know about people being beaten. You know, you had, you know, during the whole piece of Freedom Summer, you know, you had 30-some, almost 40 churches burned, homes, you know, 30-some, 40 homes, and, you know, black businesses burned, over 1,000 kids, you know, arrested, you know, and stuff is, you know, and hundreds of them beaten and everything for Freedom Summer. Well, we read a little bit about that is, but deep down inside, what we don't read about is what he brought to life or bring to life is, happens to be all these people that nobody thinks about. You brought down 1,000 kids, and they have to be housed. Who hit them, who housed them, what did they do, and what happened to the people after that? So all of that is the stuff I had buried, and he had to bring it out is, so for him to watch me in this pain, which I found out later on, he and his sister was conspiring, you know, dealing with the fact is, don't push Dad too hard. I don't find out this until much later, but you know, so all I want to say about this is that he's being very kind about it, but it had to be very painful to him too, to go through this and bring this up is and stuff like this is about the what really happened and what you really talk about when you said the movement made us is what this is all about is, and it's called about a freedom ride. It's not about a freedom rider, you know. So the title has a lot of meaning into it when you look into it deeply, and that's all came from him. So he's not the co-author of this thing. This is the idea. His plan is he did it. You know, it couldn't have been done without him.
Well, I think it is just a deeply generous and honest book, and it's clear, I think, reading it, how difficult and intense it must have been for both of you to go through this process. And one of the things I really love about it is that now, 60 years after the 60s, the picture we tend to get of the civil rights movement is a very sanitized one, very one-dimensional. And this book talks about, makes people human, right? There's real human aspects to everybody in this book, good and bad. There's a part where you talk about and it seems like a conscious decision because you talk about the importance of not romanticizing in the book. One of my favorite moments is when you decide to go to Montgomery and you say it was actually because your friend got you too drunk and that's why you decided to go. It wasn't it wasn't just conviction, right? It was people were living real lives. I wanted to know how conscious that was of a decision on you all's part and whether that's sort of a response to the way that we see the civil rights movement shaped in popular culture today or in politics today, where we kind of use this movement to justify whatever, we want it to mean whenever we want it to mean something.
Yeah, I've always sort of been struck by a conversation I had around Mike Brown and Ferguson with some folks who were there who were having conflicts with other groups, right, or other people, and they were just like, it's not supposed to be like, it wasn't ever like this, and I'm just like, it kind of was, like, like people were not like this idea that everybody was always harmonious and always got along and always, were nonviolent and worked in a certain way, and I think humanizing it is intentional and important because it tells people that you could do this too. You don't have to be this perfect person to do this, and it comes at a time where everything feels absolutely, insurmountable. I mean, like, you can speak to that, like dealing with justice system and everything just feels like too much at certain times, and when Trump is president, it feels like too much, and the pandemic and all that stuff, and so it scares you because you feel like I have to do like so much to even fight that. But the idea is like, if you do something, whether you are perfect or not, which you're not perfect, if you do something, then you can make a difference. And showing the reality and the human side of these people, I think maybe somebody will see themselves in that and feel like it's okay to give it a try if they themselves are fighting, trying to figure themselves out. And also to remind folks that these were children. Like, that's super important. Like, when you think about, like, I've been hearing these stories about my dad forever, but when you think about your parents, like, your parents tell you a story, like, I used to go play on the playground and jump rope, you still think of like this 70-year-old on the playground, like, jumping rope. You don't envision your parents as like children. And so it didn't hit me until we were like, these were children. These were 20, 21-year-olds who were doing this, and obviously at 20 and 21, you are still clearly figuring things out. And I wanted to bring that home, like, these were kids who were fighting an entire United States government that was using bombs and spies and all this stuff to take them down, and they, in many ways won.
Yeah, that's a good question. Dave is correct, but you really don't know. For instance, it wasn't just a Johnny Walker Red. I really got involved in the movement is by chance. Really didn't know. I didn't grow up in a family or place whereby I'm almighty, I understand I am black, and I'm doing this and that is, and I got to stand up for my rights. No, I grew up scared as hell of white folk. I was taught that when Emmett Till came out, the men took us to a church and talked to us how to survive. Don't laugh, don't smile at a white person and think else, and they end up marrying one, but But that's what happened in life, is what it's all about. You don't know, what it's going to take. So, for instance, I graduated from high school, Southern University Lab School in Baton Rouge, all right? My classmate and I were voted in 1989, 90, I think it was, as most unlikely people to do what we were doing, because we were just fun characters, my classmate was, his brother was doing a march in 1960 from Southern University, passed by the campus to try to get us. We said, no, we went to his house and played basketball. His name was Hubert Brown, better known to most people as H. Rap Brown. He's my classmate. We had no, so I really got involved in the civil rights movement, but the fact is that I'm walking across campus. I want to be an electrical engineer, nothing else at Dillard University, HBCU in New Orleans. Well, anything to do with no civil rights things. I walked by, there was this lady on the stoop, and she was talking about civil rights and stuff like that. I'm like, okay. And I went to walk away, and oops, and go back. She was very attractive. So I went to talk to her, and she talked me into first date going to the civil rights meeting of the Congress of Racial Equality Corps, at New Zion Baptist Church, Reverend A.L. Davis, and where SCLC was founded in New Orleans. That was my first introduction. It was chasing, not trying because I've done civil rights. And that's the honest to God truth about it. So you never know. So actually, yes, part of getting to the Freedom Ride was Johnny Walker Red, but also Doris was on that doggone, go get on that bus, challenging me, But then something happened when I got to Montgomery, Alabama. I'm there in this room, Dr. Harris's house, who was a pharmacist. And in this room, the people like Martin Luther King, C.T. Vivian, Y.T. Walker, Andrew Young, John Lewis, Diane Nash, people I've been reading about. I'm flabbergasted. Now, one is, why am I here? How can I get back to Dillard? I'm supposed to be taking exams. I have no business being in this place. My mama don't know where I am, Okay? And I'm sitting in this room here trying to think, and they arguing back and forward, should we continue to ride or not? Young people saying, we got to go. Elders were saying is, you can get killed. Y'all should not go. It's too dangerous, all right? I'm praying that the elders will win this argument, right? Because I want to get them back to school. No, I'm scared. There's a Klan outside. Then all of a sudden there's a voice. Where it came from, I asked John Lewis, I asked people from years that passed by, who made that statement? Everybody said, what statement are you talking about? And I'm saying, the one that said, there's not enough space in this room for both God and fear. And boom. I'm gonna ride, get me on that bus, That's how I got involved in the movement. How it happened, what happened with me at that time it's like getting religion in the old days, Some of y'all might have heard your parents grow, but I don't see anybody in this audience who remember those days, But that's what you don't know. So a lot of my opportunities, but why I'm here today, had a lot to do with a desire, commitment, but it had a lot to do with just dumb luck. All right? And the hand of God and the people and in the communities, who took care of us and everything else, is that this book brings alive of those people that we've forgotten is. We did not, the young people, SNCC, CORE, SCLC, we did not begin, now start, now make the movement. It was there when we got there. It was revolutionary during those days is for a black person to carry an NAACP card. That was a revolutionary act. But they were carrying those cards. Even some people had it buried in their backyard in little cans. So what we deal with and stuff, there was always been a movement among black people for freedom and justice in this country since they were brought over here as enslaved people. And we'd have to remember that in terms of where it comes from. It came from the guts of it. We are part of that movement, and that's what made us. We didn't make that.
Another thing that I really love about the book is that it talks about both the big moments, right, the major events, but it talks about what it takes to get there. It talks about the organizing it takes to get there, the structure you have to build, the infrastructure, the grunt work, right, which a lot of people don't think about when they think about the civil rights movement. I'd like to hear both of your thoughts on why that was important to include and whether you think that aspect of the movement gets the level of attention in reflection now that we look back on it that it should.
Well, Dad can speak to that a lot of that grunt work. Obviously, he did it, and that's I can't. That's not like community organizing. I can't even think about organizing humans and doing stuff. I work by myself and write on paper. That's what I do, and so the idea of that is just so, it was just so fascinating to me. Like the ingenuity that they had. You know, we have a story of them, which I'm not going to tell the whole thing, where they disrupt this state fair in Shreveport, which was like high school kids and college kids who came up with this plan. And it's like one of the most ingenious plans I could ever think of, where nobody gets arrested, where they use white, like an understanding of white fear and white anger, and use it and weaponize it against white folks in like this really sort of brilliant way. I think that's, you know, sort of, it's very important. Like, I think there's an idea that people just got together and marched and then went to jail, and then you weren't in jail anymore, then you marched again, and then that was it. But there's like actual hard work. And I think one of the things that's important about that work is for people to understand, like Dad was saying, that work was already there, built in decades, generations before SNCC and CORE came to Mississippi and Louisiana. Like everywhere there is a movement, there are folks already there doing it. And I think that's important, especially now, because you have like Minneapolis or Ferguson or, you know, wherever in Florida or Atlanta, and people fly down and they're like, all right, we know what we're doing. We have all these millions of dollars. We're going to do this movement. And it's like, you have to understand that there are folks already here who have a very intimate understanding of all of the systems that they're up against. You don't tell them what to do. You listen to them and follow them and help where you can. And I don't want to be critical of what's going on, but like I see too much of not that going on. And my hope is that, you know, they can see some of what they were doing back then and sort of take a little bit of heed of that.
Right. Yeah, we learned from the elders. I mean, if you think about it, is the elders of family people, they all had to organize just to survive. You know, if you listen to them, you know, what it was all about, how they built this structure around things. My grandmother was a good example, is my grandmother. So we were living in this area, but first of all, I was born on a plantation, all right? So for 9 years, you know, I had to walk a little bit to get to the outhouse, you know? You hate when wintertime comes, but whew, you know? And the fact is that you were the youngest one there, you're the last one to take a bath, you know, that turned out to be clear water in the beginning. You know, it was brown water, but you had to get in, because ain't nobody taking the water in and out, because you have no running water, you see? You know? So that's how I grew up. But you had their pieces about family and structure pieces. And my grandmother, later on, we moved from the plantation to Shreveport in the city. At the area that we lived in, you still did not have any sewage and stuff there, you know? So my grandmother got on the street, this block area there is, where there was sewage ran in the white folks area, and didn't come down to where we did on 79th Street. And so she tried to organize the street, the block is. And so they had told her to get the sewer, that the people there would have to dig their own ditch for the laying of the pipes and stuff. So my grandmother is like, okay. So she began to try to organize, and people just, you know, they get off, they tired, you know, work a day. So finally decided to organize. She got them together. As the women would cook in the evening, the men have to get off of work, and on weekends, they would dig those ditches. And they would do that, and they did that. And so they finished the ditches. So my grandmother goes down to get the people to come down to look at it. And they said to her, white folks looked at her and said, yeah, beautiful ditch. It's on the wrong side of the road. You got to do it over again. So my grandmother tried to get people to do it again. They gave up. So my grandmother got an old rocking chair on the side of that dirt road. And it's very embarrassing to me, because all the kids laughed at her, because, you know, she thought she was crazy. And I must be honest, sorry, Grandma, yeah, I did too, you know. She would sing and rock in that chair. Sing and rock in that chair every day. And so finally Mr. Jack passed by. Mr. Jack said, Miss Bessie, let's call his name as Bessie Perry. Miss Bessie, if I come and try to help dig that ditch again, will you stop singing? My grandmother said, I'd do better than that. I'll cook your dinner. And so he starts. Then the other men saw him, and they started. And the other men came, and they started. And the women came together, they started cooking, and so they did it. But this time, when they go down to talk to them and say, come check the ditch out, for the pipes. They all went down with my grandmother. This time they said, okay, good job, paid the visit. That was my first experience in terms of watching the people, the elders, organize, all right? Then I began to think about that later on, putting together is, if you look about years go by, is because it really still did not connect that to no civil rights thing. Is that was just organizing to get sewage, all right? Simple pieces. But if you watch it and think about what they did, like how the church organizes, how does the church get people into the pieces? How they deal with talks about discussion in pieces. So listen to that, what David's talking about there is there was a whole one thing they did then, and we did it, was to listen. We didn't have TV and stuff here, so dinner was very important because we all sat around, right? And then this whole other concept is, which is part of organizing in the black community. I use that term purposely now when I use the term community. At that time, we had real communities, all right? Very well organized. I mean, no child went hungry in those days. Nobody, adults might have gone hungry, but not the children, all right? And the parents and other people, they talk to each other a lot and they share with each other a lot they call it extended family. If I did something wrong down the street, Mr. Jack, Miss Mamie and them could tear my butt up and send me home, which I got it again, because I wasn't just a child of a biological parent, I was a child of the community. And the community looked out. So this organizing pieces is all part of what we shared at that time which made it possible. The civil rights movement was based upon that type of organizing. And that's the reason why in 1964, 1965, the first attack to make sure that never happens again was against the family. It started out with the Moynihan Report.
There's a line in the book, and you'll have to remind me exactly what happened right before this line, but it really stuck with me, where Mr. Dennis says that something happened that was the first moment that you felt like you wanted revenge. After all of this, after all these fights, and it had been years of organizing, it had been years of pushing back, and this was the first moment where you felt this feeling of vengeance. I was very interested in that because I think what's particularly remarkable about a movement like this is that you are believing in the best of our angels, right, while seeing the worst of people day in and day out. And I wonder how, in reflection, when you look back on that time, how you avoided sinking to those moments of wanting revenge, how you avoided the bitterness, how you avoid that feeling of what is the point of this and quitting and giving up, because that feels like such a salient possibility, I think, in the lives of people looking back at it.
Well, this is where David's brilliancy in his writing comes out, and his able to probe and be a real journalist, because a lot of that, what you're bringing up now, is what I also had pushed back. I had not helped me to relive this. That was one, I guess, quite painful moments, and the stuff is, and that, because really and truly, I had forgotten a very important piece, and that was, I had forgotten about the Harlem riots. So what you're talking about this incident is, it had to do with Cheney Goodman Swerner's funeral pieces, but James Cheney rather. And I spoke, and people always ask what happened, because I've been asked not to make a, emotional speech because of things going on in the country. And I always gave a talk to people about this. Well, I looked out in the audience and I saw Ben Cheney, which is true. And that did, and all the things about we're dying, which is true. We had died, people died, my count during that period of time is 19 people, that lost their lives across between Mississippi and Louisiana, where I was working during that period of time. What I had forgotten was, buried deep in my brain, was that before all this, discovery of the bodies and stuff is, right down to before the founding of the bodies, rather, I had to go to Atlantic City to find housing, secure housing for delegates to the for the Democratic Party, Charles Democratic Party in Atlantic City in 1964, in August. And a very good friend of mine was David Baldwin, was James Baldwin's brother. And I called him and told him, well, man, you ought to come and take a couple days off. He's good, come, blah, blah, you've been doing this. Y'all got all this stuff you got going on. I'm like, okay, man, no, I got to go back. No, so I do go. Well, anyway, to make a long story short is, I go there, we decided let's go down. He lived on 110th, around 110th and 5th Avenue. So let's go down to Harlem to Wells to get some chicken and waffles. They would serve us chicken and waffles by the way, 1964. So the best you ever had, original.
I also want to make a disclaimer that I always make. There's a whole lot of fried chicken in the book. There's like tons of fried chicken in the book.
Right. And so that's where it began. I ended up in the middle of the Harlem riots for 2 days by accident. Another one of these accidents I tell you about. You don't know what's going to happen, just drawn into it. And so on the second day there, this kid darts across the street. David and I are walking down the street. And he darts across the street. Somebody throws a bottle. Somebody turns the bottle. Cops turn around and he shoots the kid. And so David goes over, grabs, I don't know where the kid is. Cops come up, white cop come, put a gun to his head, said, no, get up, nigga, before I blow your brains out. David said, you just did. So there's this thing going on. Another cop come, leave the man alone, leave him alone, we leave. And David and I left, We don't, the ambulance came up. We don't know what happened to the kid. I don't know if the kid was survived or not. We had no idea. And we never talked about it again. So what David, through his probe and everything else about this incident and what they have is what's going on here, I'm like, well, it all comes back to me. Then all of a sudden I remember this when I saw Ben Chain. I just didn't see Ben Chain. I saw that other kid. So things just sort of exploded. All of a sudden, as we're dying all over the place. So to me I remember then, you mean to tell me this happens in New York too? I mean, I'm that naive. 1964, it's not Mississippi, Louisiana, this is New York City, And so David was able to bring all this stuff out to me that I had to relive, but that's what happened there is. And so this anger that came after that is because at the time I was taking the speech, at that time is, if I could have gotten my hands on guns and really done something there, I probably have done something very crazy because you couldn't win the war, There's no way to do that. But that bitterness and stuff like this is part, I think that all those years I've been hiding this. I mean, pushing it back is because, being in the rural areas of Mississippi, Louisiana, there was not a house I ever went into that didn't have a gun. Nonviolence in the movement was a tactic practiced primarily by civil rights workers. Local people, did not. That was a whole different ballgame. But that's what happened there. But David might want to talk about, definitely more about what that meant to him and helping to bring how he brought this out. But I had buried this. So a lot of the stuff that comes out in the book is, really and truly is that even afterwards, I mean, I have sleepless nights now, is the fact is that he has opened up a door that I had closed and locked back is that we now call, a time of darkness, which we hope to get to it later on, but this is a period that really came part of my life and many of the civil rights workers that you don't know about. We didn't know anything about this thing they called PTSD at that time, And I have a good friend of mine, to give you an example, that is, once I started talking about this a few years ago, this whole PTSD thing is, and so she said, Mr. Dennis, she called him Dave, I'm glad to hear you say this because, your dad, my dad and you were very good friends, and Jimmy had just died before that. And she said, the two tough times in my father's times of year was New Year's and 4th of July. See, Jimmy was with Bob Moses in 1964, and he was shot in Urbana, Mississippi is, and they were ambushed by the Klan, they were. And so Jimmy was as brave as individual I knew, and never did know this about him. She said, when those firecrackers go off, Jimmy would run and jump, crawl under the bed. You know, what this is all about, painful pieces, but that's another story. What the civil rights movement is about is we know about the people being beaten, going to jail, and some who died. We have a lot of us, a lot of people out there who live in this horror, this nightmare right now, you know. To the extent is the fact is that they didn't survive this. It's a common thing. A lot of our people dying, we've been there, we have to raise money to bury them. No medical insurance, anything else is, but we don't have even the money to bury them. You know, but anyway.
I don't have a ton to add to that. I think one thing is that when you talk, one thing that I was really sort of nervous about is that biographies sometimes can be like, I don't like reading all of them because there's, like time in between like really interesting stuff that happens. You got to sort of read that to get to the next thing. And so my attention span doesn't do that. And so when Dad was telling me that, you hear these stories like out of chronological order, and you just hear them. And so I was like, how am I going to get through like writing between these spaces, right? And I figured like, I don't know, in my head, I was like, this really crazy thing happened, and then Dad like organized and like, I don't know, handled papers for like 3 months, and then another thing happened, right? But what I learned was that these things were happening continuously. Like when you set the time to get like, Mrs. Hamer was beaten in the same few day span as Medgar Evers being murdered. Dad, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner disappear, and the Harlem riots happen within weeks of each other. Like all of this stuff just happened back to back, which blew my mind. Like even all the stuff that's in the book, there was like 20%, 30% of that stuff we had to take out because it was just like too much stuff happening, And it was just reminded me of the fact that like these people were under siege constantly. Like there was no break, there was no peacetime. And even when you go to New York, there's no place for you to go where you can just chill.
David, I wanted to talk to you about how being your dad's son has shaped your life, especially having the same name as your father. I am also...
He didn't like that.
I am also named after my grandmother, who worked in the civil rights movement, and that has been a major shaping force in my life. I wonder what you would say about how it's changed the direction of, how your father's legacy has shaped how you see your job in life, your work in life.
Well, more than the name is the fact that we look so doggone much alike. So it was so hard to like people. I go to New Orleans and people stop me and say, "Are you Dave Dennis' son?" And I'm like, I can't do nothing here. I got surveillance around at all times. I sort of, Dad did not push me into anything. I think the thing that he was more adamant about was being a good husband, good father, that sort of thing, and sort of being, being able to do things that were, more challenging, right? And so I never really felt the sort of pressure, like that, not too often, right? I know around Ferguson, I did sort of feel conflicted about what I should do, partly because I had felt that to be part of it again, like going back to the idea of what means to be a part is like that you had to sacrifice. That if I was going to be part of this thing, then you have to be willing to sacrifice yourself and sacrifice maybe your family, things like that. And so I was sort of torn between this idea of, movement work and being willing to die or, having something happen to your house. That was real tough and trying to figure out my place in that. But I don't really feel as though growing up I had that sort of pressure to be, Dave Dennis Jr., things like that. And sometimes some other folks would be like, "Are you writing about hip hop? You should be, doing whatever." But but Dad never sort of put that on me.
It took him a while before he would publicly put that junior on there. He had to do it on his own, and But I just want to bring that piece up.
But I'm curious, you mentioned, I want to know from your perspective what it was like.
Well, I didn't like having the same name as everybody else in my family. I'm the fifth one. Everybody in my family is basically named Josie. So I didn't like that. And then I named my child Josie, so I've just passed that on. So someone said, don't make your kid's life too easy, and that's the lesson I have taken from that. But I did want to talk about sacrifice. How much time do I have left? Because I could do this forever, so I just want. Okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about sacrifice because this is another theme in this book that I find really powerful. When we think about sacrifice in the civil rights movement, as you both have kind of touched upon tonight, we think about death, right? We think about people who were shot and killed. We don't actually tend to think about the sacrifice, the PTSD sacrifice, the years of feeling guilty sacrifice, right? What it meant that you didn't want to give interviews, right? What it's meant for you, how the trauma and the pain and the struggle has trickled down, and it's probably not done trickling down. I'd love to hear you all's thoughts on how we think about the easy way we think about sacrifice movements. Not that death is easy, but death is simple, and there are so many other ways in which this movement continues to affect people.
Yeah, I think we think about sacrifice. Sometimes we think about something you give. You know, we think about Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King giving their life, and their lives were taken. You know, like they did not give anything. They wanted to be, able to do what Dad and I are doing, and sitting here and talking to their kids and hanging out and doing things like that. Their lives were taken. And I think, again, like we think about going into movement work means that you're willing to, just not have things or willing to lose things. But I don't think anybody is, like no kid grows up saying, I want to do this type of thing. Like they just want to go and play or do whatever. And you grow up and you see a need and you have to do it. And that these are all functions of things that are lost and taken that we want to keep, and for me, I felt like, growing up was, Dad is continuing this movement work, and all right, it's Dad's got to go. I'm gonna sacrifice that time, and that's part of my movement work. Dad's gonna go. Like I remember, we went to this kid's house who was an algebra project, and we and his house was just like, there was nothing in it. I don't know if you remember, and there's nothing in his house, and I remember it was just space where windows should be, and it's like, I'm fine compared to that, what am I doing? Dad's got to go help these folks, and I want to. Hopefully, this book is part of breaking that idea that's something that we have to hurt to get free, that is something that Black folks are taking on by trying to get free. No, it's something that white folks are doing to us for trying to get free. Like there is a world in which there should be at least a world where we say, hey, I kind of want this right. And folks are like, oh, I didn't think about that. Here, you can have it. That would be ideal. And the fact that it's not like that is not something for Black folks to carry as much as it is for white folks to stop doing to us.
Yeah, I think that it's very difficult to describe for me what it means by this whole sacrifice and what happened in the movement piece. Because to me, the real sacrifices were really made by the people we don't talk about, what I call the ghosts of the movement. When I talked about earlier about people who housed us, who fed us, those are the people who had to live. They knew what fear was. They knew what could happen to them, They gave up their beds for us to sleep in. But I know that at times we talk about the chicken pieces and we laugh about it, but the meantime that was real, because we only got $25 a week, when we were working in the movement of those days. That took care of everything. housing, food, gasoline for the car, although it was only 30 cents a gallon, 25, 30 cents a gallon, but that was 25, 30 cents a gallon from $25, So to go out we had a strategy for going out to knock on doors around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening when we knew people were having dinner, because we were part of that extended family. And they took us in because we were like their children. And they always would say, come on, why don't you have a piece of chicken? Why don't you, some of the best chicken sandwiches, not for the Popeyes and stuff like that. It was taking that Wonder Bread and put that chicken thigh between it and wrapping it up. That was your best chicken sandwich.
I told you, there's tons of chicken in the book. Like, I don't think y'all understand how much chicken is in this book.
But at any rate is, when you talk about sacrifices, what people had to give up to be that part. When they went down to register to vote, they knew they could lose their jobs, whatever that was, How they'd be treated afterwards is just to exercise that one right. So for them to do that, that was very revolutionary. We might not, visualize that in a sense but what they did then, what we did, the people were able to do then, just to take that one simple act. I'm going to go down and try to register to vote. They were taking their lives in their own hands and the lives of their children in their own hands Their homes could be bombed, they could be beaten, they could be this. That's sacrifice. I mean, that's the painful, So what it is hurtful today is to see people like, I ain't got time to go down and register to vote, And you think about the fact is that what these people paved the way for them to exercise that particular right is. And coming from miles and miles around to do that. This book talks about a story, so I won't tell it all this, about this old couple that's buried in my head who came down to register to vote in a buggy and a mule. That was their act of defiance. And they had to walk by that sheriff and everybody else says, who looked them in the eyes, and they looked them in the eye. And what I cannot get out of my head is the fact is, even now, nightmares of watching them take that wagon back. And I don't know whatever happened to them. So you don't sleep about it. That's sacrifice. That's suffering, that's painful. Or what they had, and they knew what they were dealing with is, and had to go back into those backwoods. That's what we have to think about when we think about sacrifice and movement. Not what, the Kings and others and Bob Moses and others and myself, what we did is, and I love them all because we left their homes in those backwoods whereby they had to come up against Billy Noble and those sheriffs and people like that every day just to go to get grocery.
I'll ask one more question before we. So this experience obviously dredged up decades of experiences and emotions that, like you said, you had kind of pushed back. You're writing a book from your father's point of view. You're also writing about your relationship. There's a lot here, and I want to know if it's been a healing experience for you all, or how you look when you look back at it now over the past couple of years. I don't want to ask if you're glad you did it, because you're obviously glad you did it, but do you
I'm
feel
glad. I don't know if Dad's glad about it.
Do you feel as if it brought some it brought some peace, it brought some closure to some elements of your past and your lives and your relationship that you hadn't kind of been dealt with or been able to deal with without this process? And that goes for both of you.
Yeah, I'll go first. I think, Dad and I, obviously for us to have done, we were good to have started this process. I think we were in a more sort of like, not necessarily always spoken type of good. Like we're fine, Now, like this, the letters, there's a long story of process of how these letters came to be, but they were the last thing that Dad read. The book was done. I couldn't figure out how to write my voice, and they were the last thing he read, and he read them we took a week in Myrtle Beach, and hung out, and I just handed them to him. I said that, we're going over, I don't think I told him I was gonna hand it to him, and so I had, we were going over the book. We were supposed to just go and fact check and go through the information and stuff, and I just said, here, these are the things that's gonna be in there too. And he sat down and he read them, and we just talked it out and cried and talked and had the conversations that a lot of dads and sons and, men just don't have, or parents and children just don't have all the time. We had those conversations. I think we're in like a better place that I didn't think that you could even. I wasn't trying to get to this place. I didn't think those places existed, And now that we can we're going to be, traveling together a little bit, doing this stuff. We're hanging out. We've had a wonderful sort of weekend and doing things that are just we know each other better. And I think that's extremely important. So this has been the healing process. And to get there, I had to ask all these really hard questions. He had to make these answer really hard questions. And I had to learn things that were really difficult. And I had to put my dad through a lot, as you've heard, I had to put him through a lot of hard stuff. And it was not easy, but I definitely think it was worth it. And it was a conversation that I don't think that we would have had if not for us doing this book. So I'm grateful for it, thankful for it.
Yeah, it was painful because, in reading a book, you'll see that you're going to say, there's more to this. And so you're right. And so there's more to come also. Because it does get very deep. I said earlier, and I'll say it again, I was not the father that I should have been. My kids because of what I went through in the movement pieces, I caused a lot of people a lot of pain. And so part of my healing process is getting that out. So part of that, so he knows a lot more than you put in that book. A lot more than but a lot of things that I feel I need to share because people need to understand, what this is all about when you raise that question about sacrifice for the others and what that represents here. I have family here sitting in this front row, I've got two of my grandchildren, Langston, October, yes, people, I have Davy's wife, here's my daughter-in-law, here, Chrissy, I have David's mother, Carolyn is here, and went through this piece with me. And I have my present wife, Nancy, sitting here, who's going through it now with me. So sharing pieces. So a lot of people is, it's not easy. But what David has helped me to do, father, son, which he, is that he's helped me to embrace those dark times in my life and understand that there were good times and the dark times but they're all part of your life, so you have to embrace it, the good, the bad. So I sort of this life goes, I got born and I go, civil rights movement, then I do this, and I do this, and I'm here, I'm back here. And what I'm doing now, I'm very happy with my life, So it's sort of in between this, I need to talk about it, and this part is that we share. I feel with him, I can talk to him about anything. That's what I feel, And there's a lot of problems I haven't yet, but it's coming. But there's to have somebody, a son, to be part of you to that extent is very important in your life. The good, the bad, the ugly. And they take you, and that is what unconditional love is all about. They can take that good, that bad, and become part of it. So, for us black males have been blamed for so much in terms of paying to families and whatever it is, and that's not their fault, in a sense, as we're caught up in a system that's intentionally has been geared toward destroying the black male. So our survival has been the women, who the strength that they brought and shown, demonstrated in this book that Davy very intentionally, gives a lot of attention to, the black female and her role in terms of making us, of the movement, but their role that has been buried also pieces. and what family is all about is. And if you really think about it, is one of the really crazy but horrific pieces in our lives as a people is we've allowed white folks is to separate us, you know, and and then to downplay the power of our family structure, which is the extended family that we once had. And we really had real communities and stuff is. We began to believe the hype, you know, that they put out there. You know, we get Moynihan report and stuff like that. You know, nobody talks about imprisonment of black people, you know, Jim Crow laws and what it did to black males, and still happens to be doing that is. So how we change that is, we have our black kids on the streets. They've taken the communities away. It takes a village to raise a child. We don't have our villages anymore. We let them have it. Expressways and stuff that came through, and we call urban renewal, that was intentional to break us apart. So how do we rebuild and everything else? It's what Davy's approach in his book is bringing to life, you know, these things. You know, what do we do with it, you know? You know, and so I'm hoping that people can, and reading this book, looking between the lines. I'll repeat again, there's a reason. And I didn't have anything to do with this. He named it, you know. You know, he talked about a freedom ride, not a freedom rider, you know. So we still on that ride. It's a never-ending ride, whether we like it or not, you know. So the movement made us. We didn't make the movement. It was here. You know, we've played a part in that continuation of that movement. But we, Snake Corps, other people, young people, we came in a part of this, and our families, the adults, the elders, embraced us as part of the community, as part of their family, you know. And so we got to figure out how to not worry about how low the pants are these kids are wearing. That's concentrating on the wrong end. Let's deal with the fact is, what's in their head is, how many of them do we give a hug to, you know, or to talk to, or to share information to, and stuff is. So what he does with this book is that brings it his own way, is bringing this out is. So you have to read between the lines also. And I'm enjoying the fact is that we've been in a couple of places in the classrooms and watching these kids address these issues there. I mean, the young people are getting into the deep part of it. You know, I mean, I was virtually attacked almost is because of my whole story about Doris and seeing her on this platform. And so all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, I hadn't thought about that is. I mean, they felt that I was not valuing her real contribution to the movement. I was looking at her body and stuff is and not thinking about what she's saying in her head, you know, and I'm like, well, I never thought about that, you know. Although I disagree, but anyway, in one sense it. But anyway, I just wanted to say that. Sorry, I got carried away again.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you both so much for talking. I have 9 million more questions that I'll just have to ask you at another time. I just don't want to, what are we doing next?
I think we're going to invite folks to come hang out in the lobby.
Okay, great.
Chat, or you can ask questions directly at the maybe take pictures too.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us.
I want to thank Josie especially for doing this. Like, Josie's one of the dopest people ever. I learned so much from Josie. I listened to her podcast, then tell people what I learned the next day. I learned it myself and to sound smarter. And so follow and read everything that she does.
Yeah, I've one last request, if I may, just quickly, is in that, yeah, we have this is intentional here, this flower plot back here. Chrissy, David's wife, came with an idea is, and it happened from our being put part of the, what's the name of the place, book signing? Four Keeps, yeah, right. And so, right, got to go to this place. It's wow, this is great. And so, well, yeah, we were drinking Crown Royal and wine and and eating cinnamon rolls. So it was a great get together. But at any rate, is what came out of that is one of the things what this book is about. A lot of the people who we talked about that we don't know. Don't know what happened to them. And the people that we do know what happened to them, who are not here, as David mentions, that they would like to be hanging out with us. And I do think, though, in spirit, that they are here. Some of them, I lost some very good close friends, Bob Moses, and it's like my brother, who passed a few months ago. Many others, but the things I feel like they're here. So we want to do just stand for a moment. We got this powerful easy. We're going to take some water here. No, you don't have anything unless you got some Crown Royal or Johnny Walker Red in your pocket. Feel free to take it out, but we're going to do a little libation here, just pour it in here. And so take a moment of silence and remember them. And remember those people who have, that you know about, where your real sacrifices made also is who are not here, and whose lives were taken from them. And the young people and kids out there today who are dying by the second, because of, not because they don't like each other, it's because of the system, And so, bear with me, take a moment, and Dave and I are going to do a thing here. You too. All right, just in a moment of silence while we do this in memory of those. So just think about in your head someone, whomever you want to give some thought, praise to. Thank you.